Welcome. Did I get out? Okay. Drink with James, episode 138. Thank you, Tim. We are at the beginning of new things. We are mere hours away from signing a lease on a new office, which we are sitting in illegally. Don't tell our landlords. So we grew out of our space on 72 or 73 Spring Street. We are moving down to the Lower East Side to an office that is shockingly and frighteningly 4 times as big as the one we're in. It will not look like this when we move in. The floors will not have gaping holes in them. This was a factory before. They had 100 sewing machines in this place. And we are scared and excited to embark on this and build out a new office. And when you guys come to a 4U or a 10-4, the next one will be here. And I will have spent an absolute fuckload of money, but it will look a lot better. So, welcome to our new home, and welcome to Drink with James. Let us, do I have any other announcements?
What does it mean for you to see the company grow into a space like this?
Yeah, I did an Instagram post about this the other day. It's wild to be in this space. It's wild to be here. I think when we moved into our last office, we had just raised a round of funding, and that was what allowed us to move into the space that we're in now. We have not raised any money now. So the 3 years of just shockingly hard work, we can kind of see that paying off. And I think for a lot of the employees who started after we went from Rich's apartment to the office are now seeing this progression. And I think it's exciting because, we don't have a business that creates a product. You can't walk down the street and see someone, carrying or wearing your product and the company you work for and say, oh my God, I work for that company. Like, I was part of the reason you're carrying that thing. We don't have that. We don't have anything physical. So I think it's really important to have those like manifestations of your success and have something that you can look around and be like, this is not me. I didn't make this happen. It's everyone that works here, and I think they all can feel that ownership over our ability to be in a space like this, which I think is pretty special and unique. And God knows I looked at, I think, 40 offices before we found this one. So New York real estate is always harder than you think it's going to be and always more expensive. But we're pretty stoked. We found this place. It's pretty special, and excited to build it out. Yeah, hopefully y'all saw Julia's episode, Julia and Thomas's episode last week. I so respect them. I think they are great at what they do as far as influencer work goes. They're great at what they do as far as, starting that dress line. They were so thoughtful and intelligent. And if you haven't seen the episode, you definitely should. But it kind of pours into question number 1, which is that, you might have noticed that there was a conversation going on in the comments of an Instagram post of ours about engagement. Julia had said that she is, not paying attention to engagement as much when she posts. She's just trying to kind of post in the moment and post what she feels passionate about. And some people were like, yeah, that's nice for you. You have, over 1 million followers and like, you don't need to focus on this, but brands are focused on it. And props to Julia for jumping in there and explaining herself. And I tried to jump in as well, but I just want to talk about that a little more. We, as a company, are walking away from engagement as the success metric for how we pick an influencer and how we report on success to our clients. Part of the problem is engagement is you can buy it. It's pretty easy to buy. It's pretty easy to fake. Even if you're not buying it, you can be part of a comment pod. And if you're a smaller influencer who's getting 300 or 400 likes on a photo and you're part of a comment pod and you're getting 100 of those likes from that comment pod. Now 25% of your engagement isn't real, which is pretty substantial. And so we are building technology right now that is going to be able to verify and real versus fake engagement. And we will be able to tell if you're part of a comment pod, and we will be able to tell if you're buying likes and comments. That is going to be bad for people who are doing that. But it just speaks to the fact that, because we can't verify it, it is something we look at, certainly, but it is by no means, if someone doesn't have great engagement, it doesn't mean that we won't work with them. I think that it goes back to something I say many times, where like, if there's something that you think is precluding you from working with a brand, you need to figure out what the story you're going to tell the brand is that is going to convince them that that thing that could be a problem isn't actually that big of a problem. It's my 8-mile analogy, right? You kind of point out the things that could stop you from getting the job beforehand, and you give explanations or reasons why they're happening and why they're not that big of a deal to the brand. So if my engagement was a little low, I would say, while across the board my engagement may not be as high as other influencers, it's because I am not doing cheap things to try and get engagement. I am posting things I love. That means that people who are following me, are more attached to the things I'm doing. I'm not just throwing shit at them and pandering to what Instagram likes. You can talk about, what's going on in your DMs. I was just talking to, I think I talked about Grace Atwood in the last episode, but she's got a really vibrant private Facebook group that she runs. She talks about that. So there are other ways to talk about what makes, you special and what makes you interesting. And engagement is just a piece, not a small piece, but it's only a piece of the equation. And just because you may not have exceptional engagement doesn't mean you can't get deals. And y'all are right that like brands are looking at that. Not everyone is as sophisticated as us, unfortunately. Not everyone is our client, unfortunately. I think it then falls on you to be able to explain that away and explain, not why your engagement isn't great, but like what other awesome things are happening on your account. So focus on the good, and it's your story to tell. So make sure you tell it in a way that serves you well.
What else did you learn from Julian Thomas that maybe surprised you, that was insightful for you?
Yeah, I think what I really respected about Julian Thomas was their self-awareness, their ability to say like, that's not for me. With Fashion Week, with dressing like a cool girl, I thought it was like really big of her to like be able to say like, yeah, I tried that for a while. I wanted to be that person and realized very quickly that it just wasn't for me. So I kind of walked away from it. I really respected that. And I think that also just the patience, that like this is a marathon, not a sprint. Again, if you've been doing this for 2 years and you're raising your hand saying like, why don't I have more brand deals? Why don't I have 300,000 followers? Like what their story shows is like, they've been doing this for, I think 8 or 9 years now. And while they had a decent amount of growth early, and they benefited from the influencer community being smaller when they started, it has been a long slog. They waited 4 years from when they started working on the line until when they released it. That kind of patience is not, it is not the exception to the rule. I think most successful people, if you really dig into it, their stories do stretch out over years and decades, not months. And so you really just have to make sure you're playing the long game, and thinking about where am I going to be in 5 or 10 years, not necessarily where am I going to be in 5 days. Okay. Question number 2 is, how should I be thinking about charging and executing sponsored posts in stories? So first of all, stories is become bigger than the feed as far as total impressions go. People are spending more time in stories than they are scrolling through their feeds. They're increasingly important. We have seen brands more and more doing just stories campaigns. Generally, your story views are about 20% of what your reach is. So, you could probably divide your fee by 5 if you were just charging for stories. I will say that when we think about a story at 4, that's 3 frames. One story is not worth anything. So it's got to be at least 3 frames. And for us, one story deliverable is 3 frames. Because I just don't think you can tell a story in 1 frame. So that is something to consider. Even if they don't stipulate that it's 3 frames, I think you should be giving a brand at least 3 frames in that. It's becoming an amplification piece for in-feed posts, obviously. And I think, you can't charge that much for it. It's now like the expectation that like you're going to be driving to that. Just like back in the day, Instagram, people didn't charge for Instagram. It was just you charged for a blog post, and Instagram was something that you drove people to your blog post. As stories gets bigger and bigger, you might be able to charge additional for that. But right now, I think you kind of have to loop it in. Something else I've been thinking about is that I think what makes an in-feed post valuable, 1, it's getting 5 times as many eyeballs on it as your stories are, but 2, it's got generally 100% share of voice for that day. So most people post 1 Instagram photo a day at most. And so if I'm doing a sponsored post that day, that's the only post I'm doing. What's been throwing me off about stories is that people will do 15 stories in a day, and let's say 3 of them are sponsored, okay? So now 3 of your 15 stories that day are sponsored, and the brand has almost no share of voice that day. So I'm going through your feed, I'm seeing you have breakfast with your kids, you're running to a meeting, and bam, you're doing a sponsored post. And then you're back to having lunch with a friend. It's pretty jarring, and it's the thing in influencer marketing that feels most like a commercial, and I don't say that that is not necessarily a good thing. So I think influencers, if you have a sponsored post happening on a certain day, I think you should be vastly cutting down the amount of stories that you're doing that day and giving that brand a larger share of voice in your stories on that day. Because if you're doing 3 of 15, and if the 3 are at the end of the day, the chances that someone even gets through your stories, all 12 of them, to get to the sponsored post is really low, because there's drop off every single story. So the brand's just like not getting a huge amount of value. I would consider, especially if you're getting paid and it's a decent payday, I would consider at least having the amount of stories you're doing that day. And I think we will get to a point where brands will start to ask that you're not doing any other stories that day. Because I think every subsequent story that you publish makes the ones that you published before less memorable and less interesting. And I think if you're making money off of those things, especially, you need to think about making sure that brand is getting value. So that's one point on stories. Another quick one is that on stories specifically, I think you really need to think about how to sell that product, service, good, whatever it is, to your audience. We talk about this thing, conversational conversion, which is like, if I'm convincing you to, become a customer of a brand, and I'm just your friend, I'm going to talk about that in a certain way. Try and use that same tone, that same vocabulary, and the same, structure of your pitch to talk to your audience about why to use a product. Especially on stories, if you're talking to camera and you're just spitting off key messaging that the brand put out, it doesn't sound authentic. And so you definitely have to talk to your brand partners and say, okay, here's my in-feed post for my stories. I want to do something a little more conversational, a little more authentic. Here's what I'm thinking. Pass it by them before you do that, but I think it's going to be much more effective.
Do you think that considering that not many people are doing that type of thing in terms of giving the brand a share of voice on Instagram stories, that it's an opportunity for influencers that do that to stand out?
Yes. If you were going to give a brand more share of voice, I would 100% say, hey, just so you know, something we do or I do when I work with brands is that I'm going to cut down the amount of stories I do that day to make sure that you're going to get as many views as possible and that you get to kind of take ownership over my feed for that day. You definitely want to call it out if you're doing it. It's going to make you look awesome. No influencers are doing this. Literally no one has ever said this to us ever. So it's going to make you look great. I think it's going to make the partnership go better. It's going to make you memorable. So tell them that you're doing it. You're not charging for it. This is something you do to make sure things work. They're going to look at you and say like, oh, this person's like looking out for me. That's great. So. Question number 3. How important is SEO for blogs, or do you see Instagram being the largest source of traffic for blogs? Well, first of all, Instagram is not a great traffic driver in general. It is built and designed to keep you inside of the app. Again, think of your own behavior. How often do you swipe up on posts? How often do you click a link on a bio? Not that often. So I think by design, Instagram isn't great at driving traffic. It is the thing that most brands are interested in. It's certainly more requested right now than a blog post. But if you still have a blog, SEO continues to be super important, especially if your posts are answering a question that people are going to be putting into Google. If it is, 5 best places to go on vacation with your kids, that is something that you should SEO the fucking shit out of. If it is just like, here's my Tuesday outfit, SEO is going to be less important. So if you think about, and this is the same for YouTube videos, where like if your video is answering a question, it could get a lot of traffic because people are searching for those questions, and the better your blog post does, the more traffic it is going to get. Same with your YouTube video. If it is answering a question, how to do a cat eye, then it's going to get more traffic than, potentially like my cat eye tips. So that is certainly something to consider. And again, blogs, while diminishing in perceived value from brands, I think will continue to be valuable. And if you're a blogger out there who's had a blog for a while and still has one, I would encourage you to continue to put effort into that and keep it going. Because if Instagram can come and go, Vine, Tumblr, TikTok, whatever it is, but your blog is something that you kind of own and you can take with you and is platform agnostic. So anyway, thank you all. We're going to be back in Spring Street next week. And the next time you see us here, it will look a lot different. Cheers.